Tears of the Kingdom is a massive game that not only expanded upon the already vast equipment and weapon roster of Breath of the Wild, but also allowed you to fuse each weapon with all kinds of powerful, unique and somewhat useful items. Having said that, it would be pretty dumb to rank all the weapons in the game, right? Well, that's exactly what I'm gonna do in this video. It's not all going to be bigger number better weapon, because hey, some of them actually have unique attributes or modifiers that allow for statistically below average weapons to outshine some of their competitors. So with that being said, my name is Dark Hero and let's get started. Right out of the gate we need to put a few weapons in the D tier, those being the Tree Branch, the Torch and the Soup Ladle, which of course I would say are the worst weapons in the entire game. I can see some people arguing for Torch being in the C tier given its usefulness, however with fusing you can add the fire element to all the different weapons in the game, so I think that Torch ends up becoming obsolete, so these weapons are going to be in the D tier. As for the Boomerang, it comes with a base power of 6 going up to 8 with a pristine variant, and a base durability of 16 going up to 18. Boomerangs can be very useful, especially in the early game portions of Tears of the Kingdom, as if you happen to have an elemental material that you can fuse your boomerang with, you can have a weapon that can dispatch entire groups of enemies very quickly. And if it's, for example, a fire element boomerang is going to deal some decent damage, but a thunder and an ice elemental boomerang are going to be very useful in making sure that the enemies do not attack you. It's also a one-handed weapon that doesn't necessarily have to be used as a ranged weapon, so you also have the safety of having a shield, and if you really need it, you can use it as a melee weapon. For all of those reasons, I'm going to place the Boomerang in the C tier. Next on the list is the Volcanic Arm. This weapon comes with a base power of 20 and a durability of 5. You can find these very early on in the game, and their above average base power means that they can help you deal with stronger enemies. Of course the drawback is that they have very low durability, so you need to be careful about when you choose to use them. It also should be said that they get the buff from using the Radiant set or the Evil Spirit set, which will boost the damage you deal with bone weapons by 80%, which is a big deal. But I also don't think it matters too much when you only get to use this weapon 5 times. Given how strong the Volcanic Arms are and how many of them you can get very early on in the game, I think they are worth placing very high on the C tier. Next is the Traveler's Sword. It's a rather run-of-the-mill weapon. It really doesn't stand out, although like its description implies, it does have a fairly decent durability. As such, I'm placing it in the C tier. Next on the list is the Eightfold Blade, and this one might actually surprise you. Now its stats are fairly average, with the pristine one being slightly above average. That being said, it comes with a unique benefit of increasing the damage of sneak strikes by 16 times. That is an insane multiplier and will allow you to one-shot pretty much any enemy in the game besides Lynels and Gleeoks. Now you might be wondering, how often are you really going to take advantage of Sneak Strike? After all, you need to be stealthy, get behind an enemy, so you can actually perform the Sneak Strike. Well, the cool thing about Tears of the Kingdom is that not only is there an item called the Puff Shroom that is fairly common to find that will produce this smoke screen, making it so that enemies cannot detect you even while you are in combat, and letting you perform a sneak strike against them. There's also some weapons which we'll talk about that you can fuse these puff shrooms to, which will make it so that you can use this item as many times as you want without having to worry about losing it. And it's this combination in specific that makes the Eightfold Blade such a frighteningly strong weapon, as it can destroy pretty much everything in the game besides a Lynel and a Gleeok. So for these reasons, I'm going to have to place the Eightfold Blade in the A tier. Next on the list is the Feathered Edge. Now in terms of stats, this is pretty much an average one-handed weapon. However, the cool thing about the Feathered Edge is that it can produce a strong wind. This can be used in a variety of ways, however the most useful way that I think you can use this is by fusing an ice material to the Feathered Edge, which means that whenever you hit an enemy, you will freeze them, but also push them away at the same time, and because they are frozen, they are going to be sliding across the floor, potentially falling from a very high place or even falling down to the water, which will end up killing a lot of enemies in the game. It's a very gimmicky way to use this weapon, however it's the only way that I can see you using it to make it actually useful compared to the rest of the weapons roster. I don't think it's quite enough to place it in the B tier, so I'm going to place it high in the C tier. Next we have the Forest Dweller Sword, which comes with a base power of 7 going up to 16 and a durability of 17 going up to 27 with the pristine version. Now this one, as well as all the other Forest Dweller weapons, make it so that bursting materials attached to this weapon can be reused again and again. This is the weapon I was talking about earlier with the Eightfold Blade, where you can fuse the puff shrooms to the Forest Dweller Sword, and so you can use that item without risking losing it at any point. That being said, I don't think it's quite as useful as using the Forest Dweller Shield, as well by doing this you will be taking up one of your weapon slots, so I just don't think it's quite as good as the Forest Dweller Shield, and the amount of items that you want to use and reuse with the Forest Dweller items can be very limited, so the Forest Dweller Sword is going to be in the B tier. Next is one of my favorite weapons in the entire game, the Gerudo Scimitar. While it may not have a very impressive base power, and especially not a very good durability, the cool thing about the Gerudo weapons is that they will duplicate the amount of damage that you get from a fused material to this weapon, and that includes weapons as well. So for example, if you fuse the Gerudo Scimitar with a Gloom Club which comes with a base power of 50, you will have a weapon with 117 base power, which is absolutely insane. Now the drawback of this one is of course that you have a very low durability, so you have to be very careful about that. But being able to boost your damage with one material or one weapon very quickly like this, especially seeing as you can find some of these Gerudo Scimitars somewhat early in the game, means that they are a very powerful tool in your arsenal, so I'm going to have to place the Gerudo Scimitar in the A tier. Next is the Gnarled wooden stick. There isn't really much to say about it. It comes with a base power and base durability of 14, so it's pretty much your below average one-handed weapon that you can find very early on, being wielded by moblins and bokoblins. As such, I'm going to place it low in the C tier. Up next is the Gloom Sword, one of the most iconic new weapons in Tears of the Kingdom. It comes with a huge base power of 41 and a base durability of 15. Now, as we all know, this huge base power comes with the drawback of making it so that Link loses hearts whenever you use it. This can be a huge setback for you if you are very early on into the game, as most likely you don't have any upgraded armor, and as such losing 1 or 2 hearts means that you are probably going to die whenever you get hit. I actually did a full challenge run on my channel where I was only allowed to use Gloom weapons for the full playthrough, and let me tell you, it was actually pretty hard, so you can go watch it in case you haven't. That being said, the Gloom Sword is a one-handed weapon, so you can use the shield for some added protection, and many of you may not know about this, but you can actually use the Gloom Sword as a fused material, and this trick makes it so that you lose the drawback of losing health whenever you use it. You're also able to find Gloom Swords and the other Gloom weapons very early on into the game, and while the Gloom Hands may be somewhat difficult to defeat at first, the Phantom Ganon that spawns is actually pretty easy to deal with, and so you may be 5 or 6 hours into the game with one of the most powerful weapons the game has to offer. For me, the Gloom Sword is an easy S tier. Next on the list is the Knight's Broadsword, one of the most underrated weapons in the entire game. I'm telling you, people have been sleeping on this weapon for such a long time. Overall in stats, it's slightly above average for a one-handed weapon. Now the great thing about it is its unique passive that makes it so that you deal more damage whenever you have only 1 heart left. You may be thinking that it's quite risky to play around only having a single heart. Well, thankfully it's a one-handed weapon, so you can always use a shield. But the bonus that you get from this weapon is a 2 times damage multiplier. Yes, it will double the damage of the base power of the weapon, but also the material that you added on top. This is why you may have seen many speedrunners using this weapon in their runs, because it simply deals so much damage. I do understand that its drawback may be too much for some people, and if you are in the late game, you probably have so many hearts that you are probably never going to be at a single heart left. So for all of those reasons, I'm going to place the Knight's Broadsword in the A tier. Next on the list is the Zonite Sword, and I'm going to combine the base, strong and mighty Zonite swords into one. So the mighty Zonite Sword comes with a base power of 10 and 18 durability. Its unique perk will add upon the base value of the weapon, if and only if you're using a fused material that is of Zonite origin. In the case of a base Zonite weapon, it will add 3 to the base damage, 5 for the strong Zonite weapon, and 10 for the mighty Zonite weapon. So in the case of the mighty Zonite Sword, it would have a base power of 20. Which really is nothing all that special considering that the base power of the Zonite materials isn't all that amazing, and that you are limited to using those Zonite materials to get this bonus. It's not bad by any means, but it's definitely not as good as I would like it to be. But because you can find so many of these all over Hyrule, and even get so many of these as rewards for completing a shrine, I'm going to place the mighty Zonite Sword in the B tier. After that we have the Royal Broadsword. Its bonus makes it so that you will double the damage you deal throughout a flurry rush. So if you are good at flurry rushes, you essentially get a stronger Knight's Broadsword that doesn't require you to be at a single heart. And because it is a one-handed weapon, it means that you also have the protection of a shield, so you can't quite literally just be jumping around a monster waiting for them to attack, so that you perform a flurry rush and deal as much damage as possible. Again, this weapon is also very commonly used in speedruns because it is such a big bonus that you get out of it, and this one also comes with very decent durability. So, in my opinion, it's not quite enough to reach the S tier, but it is going to be at the very top of the A tier. Next on the list is the Royal Guard's Sword. By now you have probably seen people using the Royal Guard's weapons and fusing them with Molduga's Jaws, as that would count as a bone weapon, which means that you can take advantage of the Radiant Set bonus, which will give your bone weapons an 80% damage increase. Now the thing is, the Royal Guard's weapons are used in particular because for one they come with a high base power. In the case of the one-handed sword it comes with 22 going up to 30 with a pristine weapon, but the Royal Guard's Claymore comes with a much higher attack stat, which means that this method is going to be much more effective with the two-handed weapon. And the perk of the Royal Guard's Sword is that it will increase the damage of your weapon whenever it's about to break. And in case you didn't know, the last hit of your weapon when it actually shatters also deals increased damage. So what a lot of players do is, they either save the weapon that is about to break and only use it for example, whenever they mount a Lionel, as it does not use any durability, or they will use the very last hit of the weapon to deal an insane amount of damage to a boss. But again, because this is a one-handed weapon, it simply does not have as much damage as the two-handed counterpart. And because it has so very little durability, it's simply not a very good weapon for you to use as you do a casual playthrough. And so you would be wasting a potentially limited weapon slot just to have a weapon that doesn't even have all that much damage when you combine all of these things. So after saying all of that, I'm going to place the Royal Guard's Sword in the A tier. Next on the list is one of the champion weapons and my personal favorite weapon in the entire game, the Scimitar of the Seven. It comes with a base power of 28 and 60 durability, and its bonus is pretty much the same of that of any Gerudo weapon in the entire game, which means that it's going to double the damage of whichever material you fuse on top. But when compared to the rest of the Gerudo weapons, this one simply has more damage and a ton more durability. And because it is a one-handed weapon, and you also happen to get a very good shield whenever you finish the quest and receive the Scimitar of the Seven as well. There really isn't a lot that needs to be said, as I believe the Scimitar of the Seven is one of the very best, if not the best weapon in the entire game, and as such it belongs at the very top of S tier. The Seabreezing Boomerang is pretty much the same thing as any other boomerang in the entire game, but it comes with a base power of 16 and has 20 durability, which is much better than all the other one-handed boomerangs in the game, and so it ends up becoming just a little bit more useful, which, in my opinion, warrants putting the Seabreezing Boomerang in the B tier. Next is the Soldier's Broadsword. It's a very middle of the road, if not underwhelming one-handed weapon that has the benefit of having quicker charged attacks. Now I simply don't think charged attacks are all that good in Tears of the Kingdom, with the exception of two-handed weapons. And because this one also doesn't have a very high base power, I really don't think there's much else I can do besides placing this one in the C tier. Next on the list is the Magic Rod, which is the one-handed counterpart of the Magic Scepter and the Magic Staff. Now these ones come with a base power of 6, 8 and 3 respectively, and all of them with a base durability of 14. But I don't think their base power matters all that much, as you will be fusing them with an elemental gem or even a star fragment so that you can use their elemental attacks from range. Now in Tears of the Kingdom you can add elemental attacks to pretty much any weapon in the entire game, which makes these ranged weapons somewhat less useful or less special. That being said, it's not like they don't have their own special uses, and in fact I would say that they can be very good. It's just that I don't think I would replace any weapon that I have put in the A tier with the Magic Rod or any of these magic items, but I also think they are above everything that I have put in the B tier, so I'm going to be placing the Magic Rod, Scepter and Staff, all three of them at the bottom of the A tier. Next is the Sword of the Hero, which comes with a base power of 17 and 27 durability. Besides looking good, this weapon doesn't have anything special or any standout feature. Its stats are slightly above average, and so its placement is going to be high in the B tier. And after that we have the White Sword of the Sky, a beautiful weapon with a base power of 24 and a huge base durability of 45. Again, it doesn't really have any standout features, but these stats are very solid and warrant putting the White Sword of the Sky in the A tier. Next we have the Zora Sword. Now as we all know, the special properties of the Zora Sword make it so that the whole weapon, base and fused material on top is going to deal double damage whenever Link is wet. That means that you can simply use a splash fruit on the floor and that will count. You don't need to be near any body of water for this to take effect. And that is a pretty solid effect, but as we have seen before, we have so many more effects that you can get that in my opinion are simply stronger. And because the base power of the Zora Sword is only 12 with the pristine version, it ends up being a good weapon, but it's still overshadowed by quite a few. With that, in my opinion, the Zora Sword still deserves to be in the A tier. Next on the list is the iconic Master Sword. A weapon with a base power of 30 and 40 durability, although this weapon cannot be broken and can instead be recharged. The cool thing about the Master Sword in Tears of the Kingdom is that it will actually double in power whenever you are fighting Gloom enemies, which actually happens quite a lot. Also, the fact that this weapon has its own dedicated weapon slot and doesn't replace any of the already existing ones means that even if you are able to fill your entire inventory with some of the strongest weapons in the game, you would still have room for the Master Sword. It may not be the most powerful weapon in the game, but it is certainly one of the most reliable ones, and for that reason the Master Sword is going straight into the S tier. And now it's time for the two-handed weapons. Right out of the gate there's a few weapons such as the boat oar, the farming hoe and the thick stick, which I'm going to place in the D tier as they don't really offer anything special and are simply bad weapons across the board. So next we have the Bigron Sword. Now the cool thing about two-handed weapons is that the value shown for their damage in the game is actually lower than the true damage value that these weapons have. So in reality, for example, the Bigron Sword actually has a base power of 38. Now this one doesn't have any special properties, but given that it has a very respectable base power coupled with a very high 60 durability, earns the Bigron Sword an easy A tier spot on the list. Next we have the Boulder Breaker, the Goron champion weapon, with a base power and durability of both 40. Of course, the cool thing about this weapon is that it can be used to very efficiently break boulders, as the name implies. That being said, I find it a bit of a waste if you were to use this weapon for that purpose only, as there are other weapons that can fit this purpose, and those ones don't have nearly as much power as the Boulder Breaker. It's a very well-rounded and solid weapon overall, and because of that I'm placing it in the A tier. Now next is the Cobble Crusher, the weapon I was referring to, that has a base power of 9 going up to 14, with a base durability of 18 going up to 30 with the pristine version. Like I alluded to, the base stats of this weapon are actually pretty low, so you are much more encouraged to use this weapon to break boulders and get past many obstacles in your adventure. It's certainly very useful, but I also wouldn't place it in the same tier as the Boulder Breaker, so the Cobble Crusher is going to be in the B tier. After that we have the Illustrious Dust Claymore, which comes with a base power of 32 and has 50 durability. It's a very respectable weapon, very much akin to the Bigron Sword but with slightly lower stats, and as such it's going to be in the A tier as well. Next on the list is one of the Giga weapons, the Eightfold Blade. Its base version is actually quite weak, only having a base power of 8, however its pristine version can go up to 23 with a 25 base durability. Damage wise it's still not very impressive. However, what this weapon offers is the ability to have a long-ranged attack. Not only that, but you can fuse elemental materials to this weapon to make it so that your projectile also has elemental properties. It's not going to be the most powerful weapon in Hyrule, but its usefulness and flexibility certainly allows this weapon to outshine some of its other competitors that have higher base stats. For those reasons, the Eightfold Blade is going to be in the A tier. Next on the list is the Fierce Deity Sword, which is a slight upgrade over the Bigron Sword as it has a base power of 38 and 35 durability. There really isn't much there to be said other than this weapon being very strong and not having any drawbacks whatsoever. For that, the Fierce Deity Sword goes straight to the very top of A tier. After that we have the Gerudo Claymore. Essentially this weapon is pretty much the same thing as the Gerudo Scimitar, as it will double the power of the fused material that is added on top, with the benefit of the Gerudo Claymore having a higher attack, starting at 10 and going up to 22 with the pristine version. But because the main effect of the weapon is to, well, increase its effective power, and this one comes with a higher base attack, making the resulting fused weapon stronger, I think it warrants placing the Gerudo Claymore in the S tier. Now the Giant Boomerang is an interesting case, as I think that this weapon is actually very underrated. The pristine version comes with a base power of 23, which is considerably higher than all the other one-handed boomerangs. The pristine version also has a very respectable 40 durability, so you can have in your hands a very useful ranged weapon that can also be used effectively in melee combat. Because it is a two-handed weapon, you would be lacking a shield, but I also think that if you are to use a giant boomerang, you have more than likely already some distance between you and the monsters, so there is a decent chance that you are able to avoid any attacks that are coming your way. Having said all of that, I'm going to place it in the A tier. Next on the list is the Gloom Club, which, as we've talked about with the Gloom Sword, comes with the drawback of losing hearts whenever you use this weapon. The great thing about this one is that it comes with a base power of 50, although its durability is only 14. You get a lot of attack out of using this weapon, and as such, losing a heart whenever you use it becomes a little bit more enticing. You lose the security of having a shield with this one, which means that if you're only using it very early on in the runs, whenever you have very few hearts, it might make things a bit trickier, as if you were to get hit, you're going to die in an instant. However, once you have a few heart vessels under your belt, and you become proficient with flurry rushes, this weapon is going to do a lot of good for you. So given its insanely high base power, I have no choice but to place it in the S tier. As for the Gnarled Thick Stick, having only 19 base power and 16 durability with no other redeeming features means that it is going straight for the C tier. As for the Knight's Claymore, this one of course has the same effect as the Knight's Sword, doubling the damage of your weapon whenever you have only a single heart left. And because, well, it is a Claymore, both the base and the pristine version are going to have an increased base attack. So you do get more power for only having one heart left. I quite like this effect, but I usually prefer it on one-handed weapons because there is that safety net of having a shield. And for anyone saying just use a Flurry Rush, well, the thing is, there are other weapons that are better suited for that, which we'll talk about in a moment. So while many of you may disagree with me, I'm going to place the Knight's Claymore at the very top of B tier. Now the mighty Zonite Longsword is a bit different compared to the one-handed version. For one, the two-handed weapons have a higher base attack, and the mighty Zonite Longsword only has a base power of 15. There's also the matter of having to fuse Zonite materials to take advantage of this weapon's effect. And well, the Zonite fusion materials aren't actually very good. So in turn, the mighty Zonite Longsword ends up being just an average, if not below average weapon, which is why I'm going to place it in the C tier. Next on the list is Mobius Arm, which comes with a base power of 28 and of course only has 5 durability. It's pretty much the same thing as the Volcanic Arm, however in this case, that extra power might come in handy in the early game, and it also has the same durability as the one-handed weapon, so it's not like the developers try to balance it out by giving it a lower durability than that of the one-handed version. So for those reasons, I'm actually going to place the Mobius Arm in the low B tier. After that we have the Royal Claymore, which, like the one-handed counterpart, will double the base power of your weapon whenever you perform a Flurry Rush, making it so that in the case of the pristine Royal Claymore, which comes with a base power of 34, is simply going to demolish anything that you're able to dodge. And given how much of a punch this one packs, especially the pristine version as the base one only comes with 14 attack, means that I am going to place the Royal Claymore in the S tier. Now as for the Royal Guard Claymore, and its unique effect of doubling the damage of your weapon whenever it is about to break, combined with its insane base power of 39 in the pristine version or 32 in the regular version, will simply let you break the game. And because of the insane damage output that you can get from it, there is no way that I'm not going to place the Royal Guard Claymore in the S tier. Now as for the Soldier's Claymore, whose effect is to consume less stamina for charged attacks, which are actually quite powerful for two-handed weapons, might I add. I don't have a lot to say about this weapon because its base stats are simply too low. It is simply not enough to compete with the rest of the weapons, and because of that the Soldier's Claymore is going into the C tier. And next on the list is of course the Zoro Longsword, with the effect to double the power of the weapon whenever Link is wet. And of course, because it is a Claymore, it's going to have simply more base power than that of the Zoro one-handed sword. Its durability isn't amazing, only reaching 30 with the pristine variant, but having that base 17 power that can so easily be duplicated by just throwing a splash fruit on the floor means that the ceiling for the Zoro Longsword is very high, and as such it warrants placing this weapon in the S tier. And of course, next on the list are the spears. Now in case you didn't know, the spears have actually been nerfed in Tears of the Kingdom, as the value shown for their base power is actually quite inflated. As a quick example, the Gloom Sphere is shown to have a base attack of 40 in the game. And given how fast spears are, and the fact that the Gloom Sword has 41 base attack, this would mean that the Gloom Spear is vastly superior. Unfortunately, its true base attack is actually 30, so do keep that in mind as we go through the list of the spears. Right out of the gate, we're going to have to place a few of these into the D tier because they're quite simply bad weapons, so that's the Farmer's Pitchfork, the Fishing Harpoon, and a few others. Now let's move on to the Feathered Spear. This retail weapon has the benefit of producing a strong wind whenever you use it, so you can use that same strategy of fusing this with an ice material, so you can drop monsters off ledges or into the water to kill them. Its base attack is nothing particularly impressive, with its true base damage for the pristine version going up to only 7, although it can have a very respectable durability of 35. It's not a very good weapon, but I think that it is good enough to be used in certain scenarios, and it warrants being placed in the C tier. As for the Forest Dweller Spear, this one is pretty much the same thing as the one-handed version, with the caveat that it does have lower damage. That being said, not only does it have a lot more durability, with the base version of this weapon having 24, which is about the same as the pristine version of the one-handed sword, but it also goes up to 35 with the pristine version. It should also be noted that, because it is a spear, you have a lot more range to take advantage of this weapon's effect. I still think that having the Forest Dweller shield is going to do a lot better than using a Forest Dweller weapon, but if you are to use one, that this one is quite good for that effect, and as such I'm going to place it high in the B tier. Next on the list is the Gerudo Spear, which has a base power of 4 going up to 9 with the pristine version. I'm a very big fan of the Gerudo weapons, as I think that their effect is very powerful. But in the case of the spear, being a weapon that has a lower base power than the other versions, and also a weapon that has to hit multiple times to deal its damage, means that the lower base durability of the Gerudo weapons is going to be much more of a downside on the Gerudo Spear. So I'm actually not going to place the Gerudo Spear in the A tier, but it's going into the B tier instead. Next on the list is the example I talked about earlier, the Gloom Sphere, which has a base power of 30 despite the game showing it as 40. It's still a very respectable amount of damage for a weapon that can strike very fast, although only having 16 base durability can be quite the hindrance. And because it is a gloom weapon, hitting the enemy multiple times will make it so that you will lose even more hearts by using this weapon. Honestly, I'm not a huge fan of it, but because it does have a very high base power, it's not a weapon that should be ignored, even despite its many drawbacks, and for those reasons I'm placing it in the A tier. After that we have the Gnarled Longstick, which just ends up being one of the weaker spears in the entire game, as it comes with a base power of 7, although it does have a slightly above average 22 durability. So it ends up being not as bad as the weapons in the D tier, which is why I'm placing it in the C tier. Next on the list is the Knight's Halbert, which has the effect of doubling the damage of this weapon when you only have a single heart remaining. Its base power is nothing impressive, with the pristine variant going up to only 10, although it does come with a very respectable 40 durability. There's also the fact that the spear has a longer range than all the other weapons, and for that reason it can be a lot safer than using a two-handed weapon. So the risk of getting hit and dying is slightly lower when using a spear, as you can maintain a bit of distance between you and the monsters. I think this one is actually quite a decent spear, although I don't think it's as good as the one-handed alternative. So because of that, I'm going to place the Knight's Halbert in the A tier. Next on the list is a weapon that many have said is the very best weapon in the entire game. The light skill Trident, which comes with a base power of 16, even though it is shown as 22 in the game, and a base durability of 70. Now that durability is very impressive, and of course, this being a Zoro weapon, you also get the effect of doubling the power of the weapon whenever Link is wet, which can be done very easily with a Splash Fruit, as we talked about earlier. This is without a shadow of a doubt one of the strongest weapons in the game, the only downside of it being that it is a spear, so it does have that reduced damage that I talked about earlier. Still, having a true base power of 16 and being able to double that, with a fused material added on top of course, and with 70 durability no less, is more than enough to place the light skill Trident in the S tier. Next on the list is the Royal Guard Spear, which, as we know, the effect makes it so that this weapon will deal double damage whenever it is about to break. Now unfortunately, because it is a spear, durability is very important, as this weapon will have to attack multiple times to actually deal damage. and only having a base durability of 15, as the pristine variant no less, well, that's just very weak. And you might say that it is low so you can take advantage of the effect, but as we discussed earlier with the one-handed version, why would you use this over the two-handed option, especially once you take into account the fact that spears do reduce damage? So the 24 base attack that is shown for the Royal Guard Spear Pristine version is actually 18, which is not that very impressive for an effect that will essentially cause you to only use this weapon so you can break it or you save it to use against Lynels. In my opinion, this ends up becoming a waste of a slot whenever you have similar options, and as such, I'm placing the Royal Guard Spear in the B tier. Now, the Royal Halbert is a bit of a different story. It has a lower base attack, showing as 18, and in truth being 13 for the pristine variant, while also having 50 durability, with its effect making it so you double the power of this weapon whenever you perform a flurry rush. While this weapon may have lower damage than the previous one, I think it more than makes up for it for its effect being one that you can proc very easily, and by also having an impressive 50 durability. I do believe that the one-handed and two-handed versions end up becoming better alternatives, as with the two-handed version you have a lot more damage, and the one-handed version you have the safety of having a shield for whenever you fail an attempted flurry rush. But I still think that it is a very respectable weapon that can dish out some good damage and is not going to take up a slot until you decide to finally take it out just to use it once. So in my opinion, the Royal Halbert goes into the A tier. Next is the Soldier Spear, and I think that this is a bit of an interesting case where I would normally place the Soldier Spear in the D tier because the base version only has a base power of 3. But the pristine version actually increases it by quite a lot, going up to 7, and also having a base durability of 35, which is above average. So when you add that up, and also the fact that you have faster quick attacks with this weapon, this can be a very effective early game weapon. And if you are to fuse a rock on top, for example, you can reliably smash through boulders with a weapon that is going to last quite a bit. So at the end of the day, the Soldier Spear deserves to be in the C tier. Next on the list is the Throwing Spear, that with the pristine variant goes up to 6 base power with 26 durability. And honestly, this one is a bit disappointing. Its effect makes it so that it can travel much farther than your average spear whenever you throw it. Its effect makes it so that you can throw it much farther than any other spear in the game, unless they have long throw, of course. The pristine variant also states that it is able to pierce targets from a distance, but I've personally never seen it go through any enemies. I was really hoping that this one would deal something like double damage whenever you throw it, so it could actually be a decent weapon. As it stands, I don't think it's all that useful, and frankly, I don't see a reason why you should use it, unless all you have is the spears that are in the D tier. So the Throwing Spear is going to the very bottom of the C tier. After that we have the Zora Spear, which comes with a true base power of 4 going up to 8 with a pristine variant, which also comes with a base durability of 40. And of course, by being a Zora weapon, you get the benefit of doubling its power whenever Link is wet. It's quite a decent spear, and having 40 durability makes it so that you can use it a lot more often, but I think it still ends up lacking a bit in power when compared to the rest of the spears, if not the rest of the weapons in the game. So for that reason, I'm going to place the Zora Spear in the B tier. As for bows and shields, let me know if you guys would like to see a video dedicated to those two. With that being said, my name is Dark Hero, and thank you very much for watching.